Two men stood next to Jesus on a mountain, and neither of them should have been there. One had been dead for over 1,000 years. The other had never died at all. Moses and Elijah appeared in glory, speaking with Jesus, and for a few moments heaven broke through the normal order of this world so clearly that Peter, James, and John fell on their faces in fear. But here's the question almost nobody slows down long enough to ask. Why those two? Why not Abraham, the father of faith? Why not David, the great king? Why not Isaiah, who saw so much of the Messiah coming? Why Moses and Elijah? Because this was never just a supernatural moment meant to amaze the disciples. This was heaven's announcement that the whole story had reached its center. The law had arrived. The prophets had arrived. And both of them were standing there to point to one person, Jesus. To understand why Moses was there, you have to understand what Moses carried. Moses was not just a leader. He was the deliverer of Israel, the man God called out of obscurity to stand before Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." Through Moses came the plagues, the Passover, the blood on the doorposts, the night of judgment, the Red Sea splitting open, and 2 million slaves walking out into freedom. But Moses did even more than lead Israel out. He went up Mount Sinai, entered the fire and cloud, and received the law from God. The commandments, the covenant, the pattern of worship, the sacrifices, the whole structure that would define Israel's relationship with God came through Moses. That is why the Bible keeps calling it the law of Moses. He was the mediator, the man between the holy God and a rebellious people. He went up Mount Sinai, entered the fire and cloud, and received the law from God. The commandments, the covenant, the pattern of worship, the sacrifices, the whole structure that would define Israel's relationship with God came through Moses. That is why the Bible keeps calling it the law of Moses. He was the mediator, the man between the holy God and a rebellious people. And yet for all his greatness, Moses ends with heartbreak. He had misrepresented God in anger, and the consequence was severe. Moses could lead the people to the border, but he could not take them in. After 40 years of leading Israel through the wilderness, after all the burden, all the complaints, all the intercession, all the miracles, he comes to the edge of the promised land, sees it with his own eyes, and God tells him he will not enter. He had misrepresented God in anger, and the consequence was severe. Moses could lead the people to the border, but he could not take them in. So he climbs the mountain, looks at the land, and dies there. That matters more than people realize, because Moses becomes the picture of something incomplete. Holy, necessary, powerful, but incomplete. He brings the law, but he cannot bring final rest. He can show the people the promise, but he cannot carry them into it himself. Then there is Elijah. If Moses carries the weight of law, Elijah carries the fire of the prophets. Elijah does not even enter the story gently. He appears like a storm. No long backstory, no soft introduction. He just steps onto the stage and announces drought over Israel because the nation has turned to Baal. He confronts kings, lives in hiding, is fed by ravens, sees a widow's flour and oil multiplied, raises her son from the dead. Then comes Mount Carmel, where one prophet stands against hundreds and calls down fire from heaven. Elijah does not even enter the story gently. He appears like a storm. No long backstory, no soft introduction. He just steps onto the stage and announces drought over Israel because the nation has turned to Baal. He confronts kings, lives in hiding, is fed by ravens, sees a widow's flour and oil multiplied, raises her son from the dead. Then comes Mount Carmel, where one prophet stands against hundreds and calls down fire from heaven. That is Elijah, a man of judgment, boldness, confrontation, and prophetic power. And unlike Moses, Elijah never dies. He is taken up in a whirlwind, carried away in fire. Then later, Malachi prophesies that Elijah will come before the great day of the Lord. So Elijah becomes more than a prophet from the past. He becomes a living symbol of prophetic expectation. He stands for everything in the prophets that points forward, warns, announces, and prepares the way. And unlike Moses, Elijah never dies. He is taken up in a whirlwind, carried away in fire. Then later, Malachi prophesies that Elijah will come before the great day of the Lord. So Elijah becomes more than a prophet from the past. He becomes a living symbol of prophetic expectation. He stands for everything in the prophets that points forward, warns, announces, and prepares the way. So now go back to the mountain. That alone is overwhelming. But Luke tells us what they were discussing, and this is where everything locks into place. They were speaking about his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. That word departure can also mean exodus, and that is not an accident. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up with him, and there, in front of them, he is transfigured. His face shines, his clothing becomes radiant, his hidden glory breaks through the veil of ordinary sight. Then Moses and Elijah appear with him. Moses, the man of the Exodus from Egypt, is standing there talking with Jesus about another Exodus, not one that frees slaves from Pharaoh, but one that frees sinners from sin and death. Not one that passes through the Red Sea, but one that passes through the cross, the grave, and resurrection. That means Moses is not just standing there as an honored guest. He is standing there as a witness. He is saying, in effect, everything I did was leading here. Jesus is the greater Exodus. The Passover lamb pointed here, the blood on the doorpost pointed here, the law pointed here, the tabernacle pointed here, the sacrifices pointed here, even my own unfinished story pointed here. Then Elijah stands there too, representing the prophets, and his presence says something just as powerful. Everything the prophets warned about, everything they promised, everything they longed to see fulfilled, it all comes to this person standing in glory on the mountain. The law and the prophets are both there, and both are pointing to Jesus. That is why these two men had to be the ones. Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets. Together they stand for the whole testimony of the Old Testament. All of it arrives on that mountain and hands its meaning to Christ. Then Peter does what Peter always does when heaven opens and he cannot process it fast enough. He starts talking. Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let me make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter means well, but he still does not see the full picture. He is putting Jesus alongside Moses and Elijah, as if all 3 belong on the same level. And that is when God interrupts him. A bright cloud overshadows them. The glory of God falls on the mountain. Then the voice comes. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Not listen to them, him. That is the whole point of the transfiguration. God the Father is not diminishing Moses or Elijah. He is completing them. He is showing that the age of preparation has reached its goal. The law had its place. The prophets had their place. But now the Son has come. And when the Son stands there in glory, every other voice must step back. When the disciples finally look up again, Moses and Elijah are gone. Only Jesus remains. That is not a random detail, that is the message. Only Jesus remains. The law was never the final word. The prophets were never the final word. The temple was never the final word. The sacrifices were never the final word. Jesus is. That is why this moment matters so much. There are still people who try to live as if Moses is enough, as if rule-keeping, ritual, or religious effort can carry them all the way to God. But Moses himself stands on that mountain and points away from himself. There are still people chasing signs, wonders, voices, prophetic excitement, always looking for something dramatic to hold on to. But Elijah himself stands on that mountain and points away from himself. Both of them are saying the same thing. Look at him, listen to him, follow him. Because Jesus is not one more figure in the story, he is the center of the story. The law demanded righteousness, Jesus fulfills it. The prophets promised redemption, Jesus accomplishes it. Moses brought Israel to the edge, Jesus brings his people in. Elijah called people back to God, Jesus is God come near. And that means the transfiguration is not just a preview of glory, it is a declaration of identity. It is God the Father announcing that the whole Old Testament has reached its destination. That is why Moses and Elijah appear. They came to honor the Son. They came to confirm the mission. They came to show the disciples that the cross Jesus had just begun speaking about was not a detour or a tragedy outside the plan. It was the plan. Moses had blood, sacrifice, law, and exodus. Elijah had fire, prophecy, and expectation. Jesus had the cross ahead of him, and all of it met on that mountain. So when you read the Bible, do not read Moses as if he ends with Moses. Do not read Elijah as if he ends with Elijah. Do not read the law, the prophets, the Psalms, the sacrifices, the temple, the wilderness, the Passover, or the promised land as isolated stories. They are roads. Jesus is the destination. That is why when the cloud lifted, only Jesus remained. Because in the end, he is enough. If you want, send the next script and I'll do the same thing.